If governments are willing to use nuclear weapons, drone civilians, and carry on genocidal horror shows, can we reasonably expect them to compete fairly in the electoral arena? Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone, and the Libertarian Institute. Today I'm joined by Sal Mayweather, the author of Anti-Politics. Sal, where is the best place to buy the book?
Amazon. Amazon's the only place to buy the book. Unfortunately, that's the way this one worked out. But yeah, Amazon.com, Anti-Politics.
Link will be in the description below. Sal, what does it mean to be anti-politics?
It means to be against political engagement, to be against politics, against the political arena. If you think about it, the market and politics are sort of juxtaposed. So as Agorists, we fall down completely and totally, unreservedly on the side of the market and 0% on the side of politics.
Now, there is often an expression, if you don't vote, you can't complain. In other words, there is a mechanism for you to employ in order to alter this state of affairs called the electoral process. By you choosing not to engage in that process, you therefore lose your legitimacy in complaining about the outcome of that process. How do you respond to, if you don't vote, you can't complain?
I would argue that if you don't vote, you can't be blamed, right? Because it's the voters who have created the status quo or have been incapable of preventing it. So we're the ones we're the only innocent party, the non-voters. I would say that if you don't vote, then you can't be blamed.
You open up the book with an article written in 1577. What is it that we could learn from someone from 500 years ago?
This was so Etienne de la Boetie. This was one of my favorite selections. That's why I wanted to start it out with this. It's really the most basic selection in the book, and the whole idea here is that you as an individual are free the moment that you accept your freedom. And I think that, and one of the things I say in the book is that's like the foundation for all anti-political thought, right? That's something that Gandhi believed. That's something that Thoreau believed. That's something that Agoris to this day believe. Konkin, and I'm sure a lot of ANCAPs and voluntarists obviously believe that as well. But like so much of it is in our head, and I think that overcoming that illusion is why reading Boetie is so important. That's why I included that section.
How would you define agorism?
I define agorism sort of like again, it's sort of, not to sound like I'm harping on the same point here, but it's sort of like the absence of politics, right? Once you've achieved a state of zero politics and 100% market, then you've reached the agora. Of course, agorism and counter economics is a sort of a strategy to achieve that, and that is sort of, we believe in utilizing the black and gray markets. The counter economy consists of any and all transactions that are prohibited by the state, that are done in a way that's consistent with the non-aggression principle. So by engaging in those transactions, we can sort of undermine and subvert the political class. And that's sort of the strategy that people refer to as counter-economics.
In doing so, you can sometimes put yourself at risk for imprisonment. The Free Talk Live guys were recently arrested for, as far as I understand, operating without a license and engaging in trading in cryptocurrency. Jeremy Kauffman is under investigation for the last 2 years by the SEC for his library credits. Why is accepting the risk worth the trade-off with regard to engaging in counter economics?
Well, risk is different for everyone. So we all have a different risk tolerance, and the key to agorism, and I think Sam was the first to point this out, so it goes all the way back to the founding. The key is to understand what your risk tolerance is and to find some way to engage the counter economy in a way that fits that. So for someone who's single and they're maybe 17 years old, maybe their risk tolerance is a lot higher than someone who is 38 with 3 kids and a wife. So you have to find what your risk tolerance is and how you can engage the counter economy in a way that sees fit. Now, it's still dangerous, right? Like, look at Ross Ulbricht. He might not have had a family and stuff, but he's looking at life in prison. And this is one of the things I told the guys at Lions of Liberty, is that all revolution is dangerous, right? It's all messy, right? It's just that in other forms of revolution, people are dying, whereas in agorism, we're going to prison. That's sort of the inherent difference here. And I would also say that the fact that we are going to prison and the fact that LP members aren't going to prison, or other factions of the libertarian movement aren't being targeted is only evidence as to our effectiveness, right? If we weren't being effective, then they wouldn't be targeting us. That's why they threw the book at Ross Ulbricht. That's why Satoshi Nakamoto remained anonymous. That's why they've given Cody Wilson such a hard time about bullshit charges on God knows what. So again, all revolutionary tactics are dangerous. I think Agorism does it in a way that sort of minimizes the risk to the best way that's possible. And the other thing here that I want to just point out is be the gray man, right? Blend into the background. Don't be like a sovereign citizen, like up in the face of the police, like trying to get shot. You want to sort of like fly under the radar. So again, operational security goes a long way.
A lot of people are motivated to join the military or police because they believe that this sort of sacrifice is very worthwhile. You're part of something larger. You're moving towards an end goal. It has to do with achievement and, well, living a life that has a lot of meaning and significance. If someone wants to engage in the risk of counter economics, where can they find, sort of like the meaning in their attempts to sort of achieve that idea of I'm going out there and I'm achieving things? Is there any reward to this great risk?
Well, if I understand what you're asking, then I would say yeah, absolutely. The reward is not only the primary reward is your own freedom, right? That's sort of the key here, right? That's, as libertarians, we speak about liberty so often, but rarely attain it. As agorism, like the whole draw of agorism is that once you accept counter economics and agorism, you're free. That's it. There's no more debates. Everything is over. You are free. That's it. The added benefit is that you also help free your neighbors, your family, your community, the rest of the world. So to me, that's the real reward. Look at, for example, Ross Ulbricht, right? He might have sacrificed a whole lot, but for the rest of his life, he can sleep at night knowing that he has facilitated free trade for the first time in mankind's history. Right? Satoshi Nakamoto might not be able to enjoy the fruits of his labor because he has to remain anonymous, but at least he knows that he's protected billions of people from the horror show that is central banking and inflation and forcing us to pay for the murder of children around the world. So like, that's the real reward is the disintermediative effects of counter economics.
That was a great answer to my word salad of a question that I'm not sure why I couldn't narrow that down. Tim Pool has said that by attempting to actively avoid paying taxes, what you're doing is you're benefiting from the existence of a state through roads, infrastructure, government programs without chipping in. Therefore, you are engaged in theft by opting out of paying taxes. How do you respond to this?
Well, I agreed with everything that he said up until the point where he accused us of theft, because yeah, the whole point is to sort of starve the beast and to dry out the towel, like wring them out as much as possible. Our goal is to transfer as much capital as possible from the political class, from the parasites to the agorists, to the counter-economic class. That's our goal. So, people ask me, Sal, should I accept student aid? Should I accept loans? Should I do this? Yes. Every dollar that you can get from these people is a dollar that can't be used to fund the murder of a child in Yemen. Take everything you can from these people. But to call it theft is just absurd, particularly considering how much money they've robbed from everybody on a daily basis. Per Byland talks about the seen, the unseen, and the unrealized. Well, think about what they've stolen from us in terms of the unrealized, right? Like all of the different potential that you and I could have that we're not able to reach, and all of the audience members listening, that potential that we're prevented from reaching as a result of their parasitism. So yeah, I definitely, it's not possible to steal from a politician. Everything they have is stolen. That's absurd.
Well, people are really seeing this when it comes to, Jen Psaki was talking like so blatantly about teaming up with social media and their recommendations for how they should police social media. And people like Jimmy Dore are saying like, this is unbelievable. He's like pausing the video every 2 seconds. Did you hear what she just said? Do you know what's going on? In other words, truth is so hard to come by. And if you have one group of people regulating what is true and what isn't true, the likelihood of you getting something so great as, the great novels we enjoy, great movies, great ideas, great books, great concepts, that drastically decreases the likelihood, and people's freedoms are hampered. The same thing applies to the market economy. When you have one group of regulating, whether it's electronics or speech, for the greater good, you stop God knows how many people from making products or services more easily available to a large number of people. Do you think there's any downside to something like that? For example, if just anyone is able to create products and services and sell them, this might lead to less safety than there otherwise might be if we had more of a oligarchic economy. You think that's possible?
No, not at all. I think that the more competition we have in the market, the higher quality of products we're going to get. Right? That's what Hayek spoke about when he wrote about competition as a discovery procedure. Right? So we only know what traits or characteristics the market is demanding out of a good or a service by going through the competitive process. Right? It's the only way that we're able to discover these things. And the same is true of safety standards. I think that all of the different things that the state regulates, that they're charged with regulating, we would see a lot of those industries become a hell of a lot more safe if we got the government out of the business. The proof is in the pudding. Look at the space shuttle industry, right? They've had, the Challenger, and what was the one in 2001 they blew up, NASA. Elon Musk hasn't killed anybody, as far as I'm aware of. Jeff Bezos hasn't killed anybody. Richard Branson hasn't killed anybody, because these guys are subject to accountability, whereas NASA has no competition. So if they just blow up shuttles full of astronauts, guess what? They get to do it again tomorrow. So, no, I think that, the only way to procure safety is through competition.
Is agorism only for people who are entrepreneurial and have original ideas, or can people who are a little more focused on the consumer side of things, can they also benefit from agorism?
Yes, so definitely, absolutely. So the entrepreneur benefits because the entrepreneur is the agorist, and the consumer benefits because they're getting a higher quality good or service at a lower cost. Your question, though, reminds me of what Rothbard's critique was. How he said that agorism isn't for the everyday person. It's only for, these shady individuals and stuff. But that's not really the case. Agorism is for everybody. In a certain sense, we're all agorists to some degree. And this is something that Konkin pointed out. Like, even just by going down the street without your seatbelt on, you're promoting, the counter economy, right? I would go a step further than that and say that you do have to combine some entrepreneurial aspect to your counter-economic activity. That's the real way to, that's the strongest form of counter-economics, and that's something else I speak about in Chapter 4. That's something Per Byland speaks about in Chapter 4, that sort of the real strength comes from a union of not only creating local production facilities, but also peer-to-peer voluntary trade.
This was one of my favorite quotes in the book on page 130. If 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bills this year, this would not be a violent and bloody measure, as it would be to pay them and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood. This is, in fact, the definition of a peaceable revolution, if any such is possible. Isn't that incredible? You can still find meaning and still be part of the change you want to see in the world by disassociating with bad actors.
Yeah, and that's really the whole key, isn't it? And think about who's been more effective at raising awareness about tax parasitism, right? Small government Republicans or Irwin Schiff, right? Obviously, Irwin Schiff has had a greater impact on tax awareness than Ted Cruz has, for example.
On page 66, you talk about the biggest Agorist wins. What are some of the biggest Agorist wins that we can actually point to and say, this is an ideology that takes place in the real world and you can't succeed at it?
Yeah, so this is really, if you think about it, it's the only ideology that's had any success. And this is really the whole, which to me was sort of mind-blowing, is that Sam Konkin died in 2004. So he hasn't really been gone that long. And look at the amount of achievements we had, right? Now, keep in mind, Karl Marx has been dead for, hundreds of years, and all these different founders of philosophical schools have been dead for so long. What progress have those schools of thought made? I would argue relatively little to none. But agorism, again, Sam's been dead for, only like what, 16, 17 years, something like that. And in that time, entrepreneurs have disintermediated the taxi cartels from Uber and Lyft. Airbnb has disintermediated the hotel cartels. Obviously, we've got the 3D printed gun, and Satoshi gave us the white paper. Ross Ulbricht developed for the first time, again, in human history, a real, true, free, and open market. And like I say in the book, in that chapter, we're just getting started, right? The ball's just getting rolling. We're not even 20 years into this. So I think some in the future, the SEC, you spoke about Jeremy Kauffman, we're going to fix that for Jeremy. We're going to get rid of those bastards, and we're going to do it by, instead of issuing shares on centralized trading exchanges like the Dow Jones or NASDAQ, we're going to tokenize shares of business and then trade those shares on decentralized exchanges in a permissionless fashion. And that way we're going to sort of break the FINRA cartel, which of course is just a cartel of brokers, and sort of take a slap at the SEC and the executive branch as a whole. But, who knows what sort of innovation some entrepreneurs are going to come up with tomorrow, right? We don't know. And that's the sort of exciting thing about agorism, is that who knows what the hell's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, that unfortunately is also a weakness. Very often people would like to be more or less lied to about whether or not someone has a plan. So when, Elizabeth Warren gets on stage and says, I have a plan for healthcare, and I have a plan for education, and I have a plan for the electronics industry, and I have a plan for antitrust and a plan for social media, it's like, well, finally, someone's here to take care of me. Whereas the Agorist, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. For all I could know, we could lose everything. Why is the freedom of agorism superior to the planning of statism? Forget the morality. Let's just talk about the practicality in this case.
Well, first, I would say that we as Agorists have a plan for Elizabeth Warren, which Sam spoke a lot about labor camps for politicians, but that's another episode. But yeah, again, going back, just to answer your question, going back to my whole thing about this is Hayek. I'm a Hayekian in this sense. I'm a real Hayekian. I really believe that competition is sort of necessary to uncover a lot of these processes. It also goes back to knowledge, right? We don't know any of these facts until we let the market decide them. So to me, like, the only way to find out what the correct plan is to let the market do it in a sort of decentralized fashion, right? We've all read iPencil, where you have all of these, tons of different actors who all come together in a sort of uncoordinated way to complete this one final product, this one final output that is sort of this beautiful conglomeration of everyone's efforts in a way that they didn't coordinate. And if you think about it, most of the major advances in liberty have come about this way. And that's, again, going back to the book, that's something I spoke about in Rosenstrasse, which was an example of like these intermarried women in Nazi Germany. They were Aryan Germans who were married to Jewish men, and the Jewish men were locked up, and they all sort of it was not coordinated whatsoever, but they all wound up at the same protest together. And they said if they did try to plan it in a centralized fashion, it wouldn't have happened, because nobody believed that it would have been a realistic strategy. So it's only when people act from the heart and they do so in an uncoordinated way that we really actually make any progress.
You quote Martin Luther King Jr. at the end of the book with regard to civil disobedience. King says, civil disobedience is the refusal to abide by an order of the government or of the state or even of the court that your conscience tells you is unjust. He says, I will be obedient to a higher law. I love that because, of course, we get accused of being lawless and uncaring and unthinking and all this stuff when we say, oh, no, it's just a higher law that I go by. I think that is such a great, nice little nudge at their ideology. Of course, politicians who they regularly call liars in it for themselves, all of a sudden you have a total obligation to blindly obey them. Do you have any ideas about what people could do to engage in civil disobedience that could be productive?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much if I can save it legally, but let's put it like this: minimize your tax burden, right? Get that to as low of a number as possible. I don't believe in really any laws, so really the way I break this down to people is just to 3 simple steps. Be your own bank, grow your own food, and get yourself a 3D printer. I think if you can do those 3 things, you'll be better off than like 99% of the population. Growing your own food security is absolutely key. One of the state's greatest tools against people like you and I, Keith, is to starve us out. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what they did at Vicksburg. That's what Churchill did in World War II. That's a common tactic that they use. So food security is key. Be your own bank, because who wants to pay to murder children in Yemen, right? That's the key. Who wants to buy, the Goldman Sachs CEO his new yacht? Who wants to furnish Nancy Pelosi's new mansion? Not me. So, I try not to use fiat currency. And then get yourself a 3D printer, because these people can't be trusted to write a budget, let alone protect you. And they are going to come for your guns. It's a matter of time. It's not meant to scare you, but that's what states do. So if you can do those 3 things, I think you'll be better off than most people.
Okay, so let's go through each one of those. If I want a 3D printer, where is the best place to go?
3dprintergoburr.com, 3 R's. You can buy a 3D printer with cryptocurrency, so you can actually avoid having to access any of these KYC payment platforms. That doesn't mean that your transaction is necessarily private and secure. You should still be using things like a VPN and Tor and CoinMixer, but it is a necessary step to a secure transaction.
And if I want to be my own bank, if I want to, if I've only ever heard of Bitcoin, where do I start?
Well, I've got an article that I wrote a while back for Agorist Nexus called How to Be Your Own Bank, how I did it and how you can too. I also have an episode of the Agora that I did with Joel Valenzuela from the Dash community called How to Be Your Own Bank. But really, real simple, I can break this down for you. The key is you need to acquire cryptocurrency. You do that at an exchange. I like local.bitcoin.com. You can, do your own research. Then you have to store those coins somewhere in a non-custodial wallet. That's the key. Right? You have to make sure you have possession of those keys. Again, do your own research. For what it's worth, I like to use the bitcoin.com wallet. And then you have to spend the crypto, right? Because it's not enough to just sit on it and hodl, like you hear a lot of these people say. That's nonsense, because there isn't a praxeological difference between money and a medium of exchange. So the way to do that is to get yourself on like a BitPay card or a crypto.com debit card. And then for all intents and purposes, that'll normalize the spending experience. So yeah, that's how I would do it.
As far as growing your own food, that sounds like a lot to learn. Where is a good place to start with learning how to grow your own food, or at least be much less, reliant on, centralized food production?
Yeah. So I did an episode of the Agora with Jack Spirko and Curtis Stone, the urban farmer, two of my Agorist buddies, and we went really in depth on this. I will send you a link so you can include that in the show notes page. If anybody's interested in it, definitely check that out. There's a lot of other great resources out there, but I think that one episode, it'll sort of encapsulates everything in 45 minutes. So
grow your own food, be your own bank, get a 3D printer. Are those the 3?
That's it. Yes.
Awesome. You, I believe this is you. Oh, yes. It's in your Rosenstrauss essay. You say the power of civil disobedience lies in forcing the state to expose its brutality to the masses. Why is it important to expose the state's brutality to the masses?
Yeah, so this is something that I picked up from Gandhi. This is something I learned from Gandhi. English were really, really nasty in India in the first half of the 20th century. And Gandhi's whole philosophy was just to sort of let it ride and let people see how brutal they actually are. And that is sort of what turns the tide against the state, right? Keeping their brutality cloaked is sort of the key to their power. Because once people realize just how brutal they are, they sort of lose all legitimacy, and they can't let that happen. So, this is something that Thoreau speaks about in Meeting the Taxman, I think is what he says. This is something that Gandhi put into practice. There was a massacre. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but there was a terrible massacre that the English did in India, and that was one of the turning points of kicking the British out of the Raj. It was something that Martin Luther King did, right? When the sheriffs in Alabama were using German shepherds and fire hoses on innocent people, that image struck a chord in the minds of the American people, and that's what sort of led to a lot of these changes that we experienced. So I think that's sort of that's a major key. Look at what Ross Ulbricht is doing. Just by sitting in prison. I don't know if you saw, Keith, that speech he gave to the Bitcoin conference in Miami recently. Oh man, you got to watch it. You would love it. But for giving that speech, he was punished by the prison authorities and he was put into solitary confinement, which is like a personal hell where they just keep you in this dark, cold room, with, you can't see anything or anything like that. So it really is a form of torture. But Ross telling his story to the world and going through this sort of flagellation process, like, that really opens people's eyes up to the monsters that these politicians are, because they try to come off as good people on the news, but they're not. They're monsters. They're parasites. And it's important that we see them the way that they actually are.
That is such a difference in how you sort of approach this, because you go from, well, maybe we disagree on some things. Maybe they see the world differently. Maybe I don't have all the data. But sometimes when there's a case that you become obsessed with, and the more you look into, the more unjustified it gets. For me, it was the Waco case, that under every assumption, under almost any type of moral theory, the ATF and FBI were totally in the wrong, and the Branch Davidians were unquestionably the victims of this. And look what they did. They were there for 51 days. You'd think they'd just be like, it's not worth it. We're here to represent the people. The people are there not wanting us in the most obvious way, shooting at us. So we're going to go help other people. We're just here to help. Of course, that is, the Santa Claus theory of the state.
Right.
Were you going to comment on that?
Well, yeah, it's just not just Waco, right? Like Ruby Ridge, the Move bombing, Tuskegee, the MK Ultra. We can go on and on and on. We can do a whole episode just about all of that. You know what I mean? So, as awful as these events are, they are useful in sort of waking people up. Like, how many people have you? I don't know about you, but I've told people about the Move bombing, and they're like, "What's that?" And then you clue them in on it, and you could just see the light bulbs going off in their head, because they're like, the government that I'm supposed to trust, that's supposed to be out to protect and defend me, is capable of these things. They never actually, dreamed up that possibility.
It's wild. Even someone like Adam Kokesh, I think one of his greatest early contributions was he would just, go to the Jefferson Memorial, dance with a bunch of people.
Right.
They knew Kokesh was behind it. The raid on his house, I don't think that footage was ever leaked, because it only would have been on, body cam from the cops. So God knows where that is. But seeing Kokesh just get arrested for this stuff, and he just sits there and puts his arms up, and they say that stop resisting, stop resist. Like, they will literally do this to you for dancing at the Jefferson Memorial, which they say is your property. It's not like he went into someone's house and was dancing. Of course, well, do it then. But they say, this is our property. We are the people. Sometimes it's good to tear down statues, but dancing in front of it, it was such a middle finger to them. Or the time, they had like a smoke-in where a bunch of people get together, and at the same time, they all light up to show you that, hey, they can't arrest us. So they moved through, and they arrested Kokesh. And it was like, wow, this thing that I didn't really know what it meant to arrest someone. It really is no different in principle than a kidnapping, if we're talking about someone who's being totally peaceful, as Kokesh was in both of those instances. That's when it really just opened my eyes to the principled approach to this kind of thing. Was there something that reminded you of in the book?
Yeah, that's something that Benjamin Tucker says, right? He's like, let's see how far they're willing to go, right? Like let's push them. Let's see if they're like, if consent, if legitimate government is based on consent of the governed, right? Let's force them to show in a public setting that we do not consent, right? And I think that's sort of the point that Tucker makes in that excerpt on passive resistance that I can't find for some reason right now. But yeah.
You just walk up to a cop. Can you send me a PDF of where I signed to no longer consent to this? I just heard about funding Al-Qaeda in Syria to fight Assad. I gotta opt out of this thing. Where do I go? Where do I go?
Do you have a form for me to fill out, please?
My congressman all day. Very often, instead of having philosophies, people will sort of have heroes. The founding fathers, Winston Churchill, Oliver Cromwell, Genghis Khan, Vladimir Putin. when talking to Oliver Stone,
Oh my
even says,
God.
you know, generally people still like Stalin. Of course, every country has its birthmarks. We like to focus on his achievements against fascism, fighting against the Nazi invasion. People are so desperate for someone to admire, myself included, very often. So, who are some heroes, and what are some narratives you could give people in order to really identify with the idea of agorism and counter economics?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And unfortunately, for me, most of my heroes are dead or in prison. Um, my my real hero is Ross Ulbricht. I think that few people did as much for the cause of liberty as Ross did. Certainly, no one in our time has done that much. I would put him on the same level as like Thomas Jefferson and Sam Adams and guys like that. Um, but also Julian Assange and Cody Wilson and people that haven't been afraid to stand toe to toe with the Leviathan and say, no, I am not playing this game anymore. I do not consent, like you said. The people who have the balls, the courage to do that, those are the people that I look up to, because I don't know that I have the courage to do those things, right? I hope that if it ever came down to it, I would. But I look at the people who do it, I'm like, man, that's how I want to be. I hope I could be like that. So, I guess, those are the people. Also, the people in here, right? Gandhi, the women of Rosenstrasse, and Theodore Zamfir and Irina Nister, who sort of helped undermine Ceausescu, and all these different people. The people that Thaddeus Russell talks about in Renegade History, like those are the people that I look up to, the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the disruptors, like the Satoshi Nakamoto's of the world. Even the people that I disagree with, right? Like the Nick Szabos and the Adam Becks and stuff like that, people who try to create more freedom through innovation, entrepreneurship, and decentralization. Like that's what I'm all about. And if you can do that, if you try to do that, then I'm on board with it.
What can people curious about counter economics learn from the example of Romania?
Oh man, that's great, because that's a brilliant question. Because honestly, I didn't know any of this until I was speaking with Prof. CJ from the Dangerous History podcast. If anybody out there is unfamiliar with Prof. CJ and the Dangerous History Show, you need to be subscribed to that show. I promise you, you will not regret it. You will thank me for this recommendation, especially if you're like a history nerd like I am. Yeah, so him and I were a co-host. He's sort of taken a break from Unloose the Goose, but we were chatting, and he's like, "Hey, Sal, you would love this movie called Chuck Norris versus Communism." And I watched it, and I was just blown away. Right, it was a story of these counter-economists who disrupted Nicolae Ceausescu's brutal communist dictatorship. And they did it by running an underground film smuggling operation. And I ended up tracking down some of the participants in this smuggling operation and interviewing them. I got to know them a little bit, and I included their story in chapter 24. But basically, what they did was they smuggled Western films and movies. This is back in the 80s. That's why they used the example Chuck Norris. And they smuggled them into Romania. And then people would buy these films, and they would turn their living rooms into theaters. And they would sell tickets to the public in an underground sort of black market fashion. And then people would see like American houses. This is back when we had more of a free market in this country, right? So they would see like pictures of San Francisco, and they wouldn't see homeless people shitting on the street. They would see nice houses, right? They would see nice cars and things like that. And that sort of created this longing in the minds of the Romanian citizenry for a more free and open society. And that sort of has been credited with inspiring the Christmas Revolution of 1989, where Ceausescu and his wife Elena were brought before a firing squad, much deservedly so, and dispensed with.
Yeah, that it's crazy. Have you seen that video?
Oh yeah, for
Of
sure. What remains of it? Yeah, because if I understand correctly, as soon as Ceausescu and his wife were lined up against the wall, the shots rang out, and the cameraman just had a chance to get his camera set up, so you only see like the last few seconds of it. That's how eager they were to get rid of these people.
I know it's unbelievable. Any final things I missed about the importance of agorism, counter economics, people engaging in being their own bank, their own source of food, and 3D printers?
I think we covered sort of the strengths of agorism. there's a lot, obviously we can do, and we have done whole episodes on it, but we could, cover that topic, basically without end. The one thing I would add is that I think it's the only way. I think it's the only possible way. I think everything else is sort of represents a regression of the movement rather than a progression of the movement, right? It's only going back to how we started this discussion by saying, it's sort of like the political arena versus the market arena, right? Sort of this binary distinction. It's only through agorism that we're able to engage one and not the other. So.
Excellent. The book is Anti-Politics, a collection of essays by Sal Mayweather. Sal, thank you for your time, brother.
Thank you, Keith.